fact that so many Yemenis continue to be held is really quite remarkable. For a long time it was being said that Yemen wouldn't take them back, so a group of us traveled to Yemen in 2007 and met with high government officials, spent some time in the Yemeni media even, and we were able to convince the government to issue a statement, the government of Yemen, saying, yes, not only will we accept our guys back, we want our men back and demand them back. So this fallacy that Yemen is not willing to accept its men is just that, a fallacy. And when we look at who's been released, of the 800 men or so who have been there, it's noteworthy and not coincidence, I think, that all of the European men have been released, and even most of the Saudi Arabian men have been released. And this is remarkable because, as we know, most of the 9/11 hijackers were determined to have been Saudis. Why is it they've been released and the Yemenis haven't? I'll say it's because they've got bargaining power and clout due to economics that countries like Yemen certainly don't have. So this is something that I think is going to change within this administration. Even last week while I was in Guantanamo, I read a report that there was some high-level meetings going on with the Yemeni embassy, and I'm quite hopeful that those will lead to a good result for my clients and the other 87 Yemenis who are still in Guantanamo. So with just these first elements of the executive order, truly reviewing the files of the men, allowing the opportunity for their lawyers to speak on their behalf, releasing the men who have been cleared and working with governments to help, I think that the number of men there will be significantly decreased. Now the next issue, and I'm realizing I need to talk quite quickly now, is that if the government decides that it needs to prosecute people, it's now going to do that. 27 men have been so far, another group will be. Of the men who have been prosecuted so far, it's noteworthy that most have been found to have actually already served their sentence and have been released to their countries of origin where they served just a short time and then were ultimately released. My expectation is of the men who get charged, many will be found not guilty, returned home. Some will be found guilty and will have been found to have completed their sentences, and some will be found guilty and they will need to be housed in our federal prisons, which is just what our federal prisons are designed for. In fact, even now in Florence, Colorado, we've got convicted terrorists being housed. This is what we've got prisons for, but not prisons off the grid that don't have the opportunity for review. Now the last issue is the men who are not triable, the government has said, but for whatever reason the government wishes to hold them. And this is, to be fair, the most significant problem. But these are men who now can be held consistent with international law under the Geneva Conventions as prisoners of war during the pendency of the conflict. I want to talk very briefly, I understand, about the reason why there's a problem with the trials of some of these men. And that is because, as we have now really learned, many of these men have been tortured. And the confessions that have been extracted from them and the reports and accusations they've made regarding other men have been the result of torture. This is something that many of us have been concerned about, but as more and more members of the military come out speaking out against what's happened, people who are on the inside, on the other side of this case, saying, you know, I didn't realize what I was getting into, and the more I learned about this, the more I realized I could not be a party to it. We're learning that the torture is true and is really a problem. And we all know about the August 2002 torture memo, which is now infamous, which defined exactly how far interrogators could go in torturing men. And what they said was, it's only torture if the pain is equivalent in intensity to the pain accompanying serious physical injury, such as organ failure, impairment of bodily function, or even death. Now, if you can go up to that point, that leaves an awful lot. And in talking with my clients stories are consistent with the stories that I've read about other people's torture experiences, and it's really quite appalling and quite alarming, and something that I think we as a people are going to look back on with much concern. It's worth saying now the Obama administration has explicitly rejected these torture tactics and has said we're not going to do this anymore. But as it stands now, much of the so-called evidence that's been extracted is tainted and cannot be used because it is is not reliable. This is evidence, so-called evidence, which was the result of physical beatings, this is uncomfortable, but I think it's important to talk about the kinds of treatment that the men received. And have commonly, even until recently, include physical beatings by teams of men armed with batons and steel-toed boots who come in the middle of the night, oftentimes, but always randomly and by surprise, and beat them. Even in Guantanamo, men have been held in what's called stress positions, hung by their wrists for prolonged periods, or shackled with their wrists and ankles together, and left that way for quite some time. They've been exposed to extreme heat and cold, to extreme sleep deprivation, being woken up at all hours of the night, moved from cell to cell to cell to cell to break them down. They've also been subjected to, and are continuing to be subjected to, religious abuses. And for this, even still, about 75 men in Guantanamo are on hunger strike who oppose this treatment and who are continuing to try to make a statement and let the United States people know that this isn't acceptable. And I actually promised my clients I would tell you about that, so I am. But, and we also know even worse that before going to Guantanamo, many of the men, including my clients, were brought to secret prisons, secret CIA prisons outside of the United States, where the torture they were subjected to was much, much worse, and I won't even talk about it here. But the bottom line is, many people confessed to many things that they did not do, and in fact they could not have done. Places where they weren't and couldn't have been, people who they couldn't have met because there simply wasn't the intersection. But these are confessions that were extracted under torture and are inherently unreliable and can't be used. But this is, again, a reason why we need to close down the prison in Guantanamo Bay. It can be done. It's in motion now, and it is being done. And it is a real symbol, I think, to the world that we are looking back at who we are as a nature, as a nation. We are accepting responsibility for the wrongs we've done and looking to the future to regain our stature as a country that's committed to principles of fairness and due process. These are the principles that we are so proud of as Americans. And with the closure of Guantanamo, we can proudly hold our heads. If we don't do this, we've already lost the war. Thank you very much for having me. I've used my time, but I'll linger for questions if anybody has any. I apologize for not leaving time for some.
All right. Thank you. Very important stuff, and thank you for your service to the rule of law. Before you go, we have an award. This is a Branch Rickey baseball. Branch Rickey was someone who stood up for civil rights in the United States in Major League Baseball, and it's an award that we give every year to someone in Major League Baseball who embodies service above self.
Thank you so much.
And this is a world-famous Rotary silver dollar. It's in plastic, so you can't spend it. We hope you put it on your desk, and remember your day here with us.
Thank you
Thank you again.